It is the early 1500s, and one quiet man holds the leverage to shape nations. He is not a king, not a duke, not even a general. He is a banker, Jakob Fugger. At his peak, his fortune equaled roughly 2% of Europe's output, about $400 billion in today's terms. That kind of wealth could have erased hunger in cities and rebuilt broken states. Fugger chose a different path. He financed wars, elevated rulers, and helped crack the old religious order that had ruled the continent for centuries. He did not simply pile up coins. He rewrote how money worked and what money could make possible. By the way, if you love money, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. Now, let's continue. Consider his core move. Fugger would advance cash to princes while taking metal, copper, and silver as security. If the borrower failed, he already held the value. In modern language, that is asset-backed lending. From there, he built a continental mining combine, smelters in Austria, contracts in Tyrol, copper in Hungary and Slovakia, silver from alpine veins. For stretches of time, his houses handled so much metal that prices across Europe bent to his will. Imagine one person today controlling most of the world's gold mines and a critical battery metal at once. That was the leverage his furnaces and contracts delivered. He also pushed the church to accept an idea it had long condemned: interest on loans. For centuries, clerics called usury a sin. Fugger argued that risk and labor demanded compensation. He funded debates, nudged scholars, and pressed the case to Rome. Under Pope Leo VI, a narrow door opened. Charging for risk, costs, and effort would not doom a lender's soul. The letter of the rule changed. The spirit of commerce exploded. His money flowed into another fire: indulgences. Bishops hawked printed slips that promised mercy for souls in purgatory, the funds supposedly earmarked for grand works in Rome. In practice, the coins filled two treasuries, the papal projects, and the bankers who advanced the cash. Fugger's network staffed the chests, counted the proceeds, and extended new credit against tomorrow's collections. That sales engine helped fund St. Peter's and the Sistine ceiling, and it also lit the fuse that Martin Luther would strike. How did a cloth merchant's son rise so far? Fugger was born in 1459 in Augsburg, a humming center of German trade. His father died when Jakob was 10. His mother sent him to Venice to apprentice. There he absorbed accounting, contracts, insurance, and the soft art of politics, the way favors travel faster than ships. When he returned to Augsburg, he watched imperial pomp up close. Emperor Frederick III turned to the Fugger firm for silk and credit. A coat of arms with 3 lilies signaled the family's ascent. A single lesson lodged: even monarchs need money, and those who supply it choose the hour and the price. New technology changed everything. Between 1480 and 1560, mining techniques improved, and demand for metals soared. Jakob pivoted from cloth to ore. In 1485, he took control of the family agency in Innsbruck, gateway to Tyrol's mines. Archduke Sigismund, lord of those mountains, was rich in tunnels and poor in coin, bled by display and mishandled accounts. Fugger offered a lifeline, loans secured not by airy promises but by shipments of copper and silver. If the court defaulted, the metal already sitting in his warehouses settled the bill. Risk shrank, bargaining power grew. And because collateral was the very material that fed Europe's mints and armories, control of credit became control of policy. The strategy scaled. By the 1490s, the Fugger concern had become Europe's dominant mining power. Smelting know-how, transport, and market reach sat under one umbrella. Then politics shifted. Sigismund faded. Maximilian of Austria rose. Maximilian, son of Frederick, hungry for crowns, needed massive financing to secure elections, dowries, and campaigns. Fugger advanced astonishing sums, including an 800,000 florin package, taking lands and lucrative rights in return. With that backing, Maximilian took key cities, paid troops, and positioned himself to wear imperial titles. The banker gained mortgages on revenue streams, mines, and tolls that compounded his grip on the real economy. Power bred obligations. Maximilian admired humanist learning and, for practical reasons and conscience, extended protections to Jewish communities when city councils pressed for expulsions. Fugger, who had long traded with and shielded Jewish financiers, supported those protections, an alliance of morality and money that kept skilled capital inside imperial borders. Through war chests and grain loans, through tax farms and tolls, the bond between throne and ledger deepened. The church soon became the stage for Fugger's bolder moves. in 1514, the Archbishopric of Mainz, one of the mightiest posts in Germany, opened. Albrecht of Brandenburg wanted the mitre but lacked the cash for the required payments in Rome. Pope Leo XI, visionary and spendthrift, expected heavy fees. Fugger arranged the financing. Tens of thousands of florins transmitted to papal accounts. To service that debt, Albrecht promoted a wide indulgence drive. Johann Tetzel, a born showman, toured with chests and slogans, promising mercy pegged to a schedule of prices. The rich paid more, the poor less. All of it recorded, stamped, and forwarded. The arrangement looked efficient and pious. To many, it looked like selling salvation. Luther knew mines. His father had managed smelting. He could see how metal and money braided with power. In 1517, he published his theses against indulgences. A year later, under orders from Rome, he was examined in Augsburg, in a hall owned by the Fuggers themselves. He left unconvinced, and his protest grew into a movement. Pamphlets raced across borders. Princes chose sides. What began as a quarrel over theology and finance widened into the Reformation and, decades later, fed wars that immiserated millions. Meanwhile, Rome leaned ever more on bankers. Popes needed soldiers, architects, and artists. Fugger supplied cash and, at times, security. Swiss mercenaries formed a permanent guard. The firm even leased the papal mint, the Zecca striking dozens of coin types under successive pontiffs, a tangible mark of Augsburg's grip on the church's purse. When a prince-bishop's covert investment in Fugger ventures later came to light, claimants in Rome and the Alps demanded repayment. Collapse seemed possible. The fix involved diplomacy and leverage, imperial support in one quarrel, papal preference in another, supply lines guaranteed elsewhere. The house survived and came out stronger because it had made itself too useful to crush. All this power made enemies. Pamphleteers painted the Fuggers as devils in velvet, accused them of monopoly, and blamed them for price rises. Luther's followers blasted the traffic in sin and silver. And yet, capitalism thrived in the storm. Trade widened, credit deepened, and a later scholar, Max Weber, would argue that Protestant ethics helped spark modern enterprise. The irony is sharp. A revolt against indulgences helped release energies that markets would ride for centuries. There was another side to the banker. In Augsburg, he built the Fuggerei, a walled settlement that offered durable, dignified housing for the poor at a token annual rent. The motive mixed faith and legacy. Charity, in Catholic thought, eased time in purgatory. Good works honored the dead. Jakob endowed funds in the name of St. Ulrich, assigning a steady 5% return to sustain chapels, masses, and the housing complex. In a ledger ruled by risk and return, he carved out a line for mercy. Fugger died on December 30th, 1525. The balance sheet of his house totaled about 2 million guilders, an almost unthinkable sum for the age. His nephew Anton carried the empire forward, extending trade from Iberia to the Baltic. The family bought estates over 100 villages in Swabia Sat, in Diets, advised Bavarian dukes, and sponsored Jesuit schools that spearheaded a Catholic revival in regions that had swung toward Protestantism. Merchants became nobles, brokers became policymakers. A brand stamped on bales became a crest carved in stone. So, how should we weigh this life? Fugger armed kings and paid popes while convincing the church to bless interest. He professionalized collateral and scaled mining into a continental industry. He underwrote art that still draws pilgrims to Rome and deals that accelerated a schism. He defended some minorities and squeezed many debtors. He charged boldly into gray zones where law, conscience, and necessity collided. He showed how financial plumbing credit, collateral, cash flows, could reorder maps and doctrines alike. There is a modern echo. When a single financier can sway elections, corner resources, or dictate policy by moving capital, the line between private wealth and public fate thins. Fugger's story reminds us that markets are not neutral. They are engines built by people with aims. Power without guardrails multiplies inequity. Ambition without restraint breeds backlash. Europe paid dearly for its experiments. Prosperity rose, but so did bitterness, until fields burned and cities starved. And yet, even in that harsh balance, the imprint endures. The Fuggerei still shelters families. Cathedrals he bankrolled still lift eyes. Techniques he normalized secured lending, integrated supply chains, politically hedged portfolios remain standard. If you strip away the brocade and banners, you can still see the Augsburg merchant at his desk, closing another ledger, writing a note to a prince, and calculating how much risk the future will bear. This is not the tale of a saint or a villain. It is the portrait of a builder whose tools were contracts and coin, whose scaffolding was the law, whose cement was trust and fear. Jakob Fugger proved that in an age of crowns and mitres, the heaviest scepter belonged to the person who controlled liquidity. He did not just accumulate wealth. He redesigned the rules that decide who pays, who prays, who wins, and who loses. Europe would never be the same. To see how radical his collateral model was, remember the norms of late medieval credit. Many loans were personal promises wrapped in piety. A prince pledged future taxes, a bishop pledged tithes, a city pledged tolls. Collection was slow, records were uneven, and revolts could erase revenues overnight. Fugger replaced vows with things. Ore in transit, ingots in a warehouse, future deliveries locked by charter. Those became the bedrock. He diversified risk across pits, regions, and buyers. He wrote clauses that forced extra shipments when prices fell and let him sell into whichever market paid best. He turned sovereign debt into a portfolio of rocks and rights he could actually touch. He paired that with better information. Agents wrote weekly newsletters from Antwerp, Venice, and Nuremberg. Couriers carried price sheets. Factors compared auctions. Brokers tracked ship arrivals and mountain weather. With better data, the house could cut losses fast and force margin in today's sense. More security when prices swung. He found ways to move money without hauling chests by using bills of exchange that cleared through fairs. His empire ran on paper as much as on metal, a web of signatures that let him be in 3 cities at once. The political calculus was equally modern. When a monarch needed cash to pay troops, Fugger could deliver within days. In return, he asked for monopolies on salt, mining rights, tax farms, or the revenues from mints and customs posts. If a rival lender appeared, he merged, outbid, or offered better logistics. Credit became policy. In council chambers, ministers argued over wars. In counting rooms, bankers decided whether those wars could start at all. Take the Mainz bargain. It was not just a bribe, it was a system. The indulgence campaign was designed like a franchise. Local preachers marketed the message, printers supplied forms, auditors tallied, riders hauled proceeds to designated depots. A share went to Rome. A share amortized principal and interest. The more regions that joined, the cheaper the cash became for the borrower, and the more profit the syndicate earned. It felt like a marvel of modern finance, until a monk with a hammer made it a scandal. Luther's protests struck nerves because so many people lived at the collision of debt and devotion. Miners owed rent to lords and credit to merchants. Peasants owed tithes and taxes. Towns owed annuities to financiers. A promise that money could buy relief from spiritual fear sounded like one more extraction layered on top of winter hunger. Luther attacked the theology, but the crowds felt the economics. The pamphlet war that followed rode on the same press networks that printed indulgence forms. Finance had sown the channels that dissent would surge through. The mint lease showed another gear. Coins were the language of sovereignty, but someone had to pay for metal, die cutters, guards, presses, and distribution. By leasing the Zecca, the Fugger firm assumed costs and kept a portion of seigniorage, the spread between metal value and face value. Good coin won trust. Bad coin bred riots. It suited Rome to have disciplined merchants in charge, and it suited Augsburg to stamp its discipline into millions of small circles of silver and gold that preached papal authority far from Rome's walls. Crises came all the same. When a cardinal's secret investment tangled church money with merchant profits, litigants threatened seizure. Fugger appealed to allies and to leverage. He promised supplies for imperial wars, freight credits for allies, and cash on demand for the curia. If only the dispute were settled on terms that preserved his solvency. It was. He had learned the oldest rule of politics. Make your rescue someone else's interest. Augsburg itself became a stage for that fusion of piety and profit. In daylight, clerks checked tallies under painted ceilings. At Vespers, chapels sponsored by trading families filled with prayers for dead relatives. The Fuggerei embodied that blend. Tenants entered through a gatehouse, worked honest trades, and paid a peppercorn rent. In exchange, they promised daily prayers for their benefactors. The arrangement gave security without stigma. Clean houses, a church, wells, even a night watch. It still works. Measured strictly by numbers, the scale is startling. 2 million guilders a death, control over supply chains that reach from Carpathian tunnels to Mediterranean ports. a client list that included emperors, dukes, and popes. But the moral ledger is mixed. Some protections he backed were real, some monopolies he enforced crushed smaller merchants. Some art he paid for lifts the spirit. Some contracts he wrote tightened the screws on farmers. Like most builders of systems, he believed that growth would solve pain he helped cause, and sometimes it did not. What lessons survive? First, collateral beats faith when institutions are weak. Second, information beats ornament. Third, finance is never neutral in a fragile polity. Give one man the key to the mines and the mints, and he will shape not only interest rates, but also sermons and treaties. Resentment follows, then reform, then new resentment. The wheel keeps turning. Fugger did not invent that wheel, but he spun it faster than anyone of his age. Picture a modern parallel. Imagine one investor controlling the bulk of rare earth extraction, the dominant payment rail, and the largest political advertising exchange. He could bankroll elections, underwrite public works, and crash sectors with a hint of withheld credit. Regulators would scramble, newspapers would howl. That is the world many princes felt when letters from Augsburg arrived. Opportunity laced with dependence. And yet, the family's cultural footprint deserves mention. Bavarian courts borrowed Italian taste through their advice. Humanist teachers gained patrons. Jesuit colleges trained administrators who rebuilt governance in the wake of religious fracture. Estates the Fuggers purchased became laboratories for better forestry, milling, and tenant management. Not every experiment succeeded, but many did, and they knit Central Europe tighter. By the time later religious wars exploded, Jakob was long gone. His story had already turned into a parable told in taverns and sermons. Beware the merchant who lends to both altar and throne. Some blamed him for every hardship. Others praised him as a necessary evil who kept armies fed and cities supplied when tax systems failed. The truth sits in between. He moved resources at scale when Europe lacked the bureaucracies to do so cleanly, and he extracted a premium that only his courage and ruthlessness could command. Stand in his office for a moment in your mind, ledgers stacked in arm's reach, a map pricked with colored threads, a courier warming his hands by the stove, a messenger from the court waiting with sealed orders, a factor from the mines reporting a flooded shaft. Fugger listens, asks 3 questions, and decides, extend credit here, call collateral there, float a new bill through the fair, write Rome to confirm terms, invite a scholar to argue a point of doctrine that will justify the next instrument. The choreography looks simple only because he practiced it daily. Was he a villain? The word is too simple. Was he a saint? He would have laughed. He was a builder of leverage. He understood that in a world of slow armies and slower law, speed belonged to whoever could move promises safely across borders. He wrapped those promises in metal when he could, in paper when he must, and in favors when nothing else worked. He left cathedrals, court precedents, and neighborhoods that still ring with evening bells. If you've made it here, you already sense the scale. Jakob Fugger did not merely keep ledgers. He edited the script that others had to read from. Kings borrowed his handwriting. Popes borrowed his breath. He showed, long before stock exchanges and central banks, that finance can be a constitution, the quiet architecture that holds up a world until its cracks show. When that constitution serves only the few, reformers will pound on church doors. When it serves many, cities bloom. He lived in the tension between those poles. Keep the core lesson close. Money is never just money. It is a vote, a veto, a quiet threat, a sudden rescue. In Fugger's Europe, gold flowed like ink, writing destinies on parchment. In ours, digits do the same. The forms change, the leverage does not. Judge him fairly. A man of his hour who saw earlier and farther than most, who could count risk and human frailty with the same cold precision, who helped make a modern world and the backlash that came with it. If this saga sparks thought, share it, argue with it, and pass it on. And if you want more deep dives into the people who bent history with balance sheets and boldness, drop a crown emoji in the comments and check the Churchill episode next. I think you'll like it, and you'll never look at power, coins, or prayers the same way again. Key ideas to remember: credit, collateral, mines, markets, popes, princes, reform, backlash, charity, legacy, architecture of power, price of peace, logic of risk, morality of debt, velocity of information, discipline of coin, alchemy of paper, weight of metal, craft of politics, more. fragility of trust, bargains that bind, debts that divide, rules rewritten. If you made it this far, drop a plus in the comments your badge for finishing the deep dive. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more long-form stories where money, history, and power collide. Curious about earlier empires of capital? Check out our Others video.